and welcome to this online workshop with Dr. John P. Clark, sponsored by the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Houston. I'm the Reverend Dr. Colin Bosson, Senior Minister, and I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this evening. Before I introduce Dr. Clark, please allow me to say a word about our congregation. For those who do not know, Unitarian Universalism is a religious tradition that celebrates the possibility of goodness within each human heart, the transformative power of love, and the clarifying force of reason. We believe we need not think alike to love alike. Our communities include atheists and believers in the divine. Here in Houston, First Unitarian Universalist has long sought to widen love's circle. We were the first historically white congregation in the city to desegregate, and the first non-LGBTQ religious community to have an openly gay senior minister. Over the decades, we have been firm in our commitment to declaring that love has no borders, working for racial justice, toiling to address climate change, and struggling for democracy. For those who are interested in learning more, I invite you to visit our website at www.firstuuhouston.org. You are also encouraged to join us for worship on Sundays. We gather at 9:30 a.m. and 11:30 a.m. Central, and all of our services are live streamed. You can view them directly on our website, on YouTube, or on Facebook. Tonight, we are delighted to engage with Dr. Clark as part of our year-long series, Future Visions, Future Selves. Over the course of the year, through worship, workshops like this one, and my senior minister's book group, we are exploring different aspects of the future, societal, personal, and planetary, from a variety of religious perspectives. We are asking questions like, what does the future hold? How might we prepare for it? Dr. Clark has much to offer us as we consider such questions. A philosopher, anarchist organizer, and environmentalist, he retired from Loyola University, New Orleans, as the Gregory F. Curtin Distinguished Professor in Humane Letters and the Professions. Since then, he has served as the director of the La Tierra Institute for Ecology and Community in Dedeaux, Mississippi. In his work, he contends that it is necessary for us to recognize that we are currently living through the Necrocene. We are in the midst of the sixth great extinction of life on this planet, the new era of death. Understanding that we are in the midst of a new epoch of death and climate catastrophe is central to understanding how we must live if our lives are to be authentic and meaningful. As for how we might prepare for the future in which mass extinction and climate catastrophe are the norm, Dr. Clark has clear advice for us. Build the beloved community. This, leaning on the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., he defines as a mode of living together in which division and separation are overcome. Such a community is based on creativity and such a community is based on creative and redemptive love and will lead to liberation. For his understanding of how such a community can be created, he turns to sources as diverse as the French anarchist tradition, Zapatismo, the democratic confederalism practice in Rojava, Sufism, Zen and Tibetan Buddhism, and academic philosophy. But mostly his reflections are rooted in his lived experience as a member of a family that has been in New Orleans for 12 generations. The habits he has gained on the edge and moving through apocalyptic disaster have given him a sense of what must be done to uncover the beloved community, which he has alternatively named a poetic democracy, and to continue to create love, life, and beauty in these times. John will bless us with his words for about 25 minutes. Afterwards, I will moderate a question and answer session. You can type your question and answers or your questions into the chat at the bottom. And now I hand things over to John.
Thank you so much. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be here. I've had a lot of connection with the Unitarian Church. I've spent a lot of time in the Unitarian Church, which has done wonderful things in New Orleans. And it's a great thing to be working with you now. I'd like to begin with a brief comment on the key concepts in the title and the title of the book, the Necrocene and the Beloved Community, after which I'll read brief excerpts from two sections of the book and finally present some more recent ideas I have on community. And finally, I hope we'll have close to an hour for questions and discussion. The Necrocene signifies the new era of death on Earth. Years ago, while I was still teaching at the university, I began telling my students in all my classes on the first day of class that there is certain information that they urgently need to know. I told them that if an extraterrestrial reporter were sent here to bring back the big news from planet Earth, there's no doubt what this intergalactic investigator would report to the home planet. It's that Earth is going through the sixth period of mass extinction in hundreds of millions of years of highly developed life on the planet. ET would phone home the following message: it's the Necrocene. It seemed to me that Earthlings should also be in on this news. Shockingly, I found that the vast majority of my students had never heard this fact mentioned in any of their classes during 12 years of primary and secondary education, and often several years of college. However, it is important that we understand our present era from the perspective of the Earth. If we do, we will see that the Necrocene, the new era of death on Earth, is the most precisely accurate term for our present era, since it follows the Cenozoic, which meant a new era of life. The second concept, the beloved community, as used here, is synonymous with two other ideas: the community of liberation and solidarity, and the community of awakening and care. In each case, the term refers to the form of primary community that is most basic to the process of social and ecological regeneration. However, it should also be understood as pointing, as in Martin Luther King's formulation, inspired by the philosopher Josiah Royce, to the entire human community as a community of peace, love, and reconciliation. And finally, it should be thought of as encompassing the entire Earth community as an oikos, an abundant, caring household of which the human community is an integral part. It is our home. I should also mention the subject of spheres of social determination, which can be discussed more later if you'd like. I identify 5 such spheres of determination that are essential to the analysis of how social reality is generated, how it is maintained, and how it might be transformed. These spheres are the social institutional structure, the social ideology, the social imaginary, the social ethos, and the social materiality. Since there is a dialectical relationship between these spheres, they should not be thought of as discrete realms. The transfigured community will be the locus in which all of these spheres will be transformed from forms of reproduction of the system of domination to forms of liberation and communal realization. Number 1, part 1, the politics of heart and spirit in Chiapas. Over the years, I've asked people many times if there was any statement by the famous or infamous philosopher Karl Marx that they could quote from memory. There's been one almost universal response, namely that Marx is the guy who said that religion is the opiate of the masses. What is so striking about this reply is that it cites only part of his famous saying, and rather suspiciously leaves out what is quite possibly the most important part. The missing part states that religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the spirit of spiritless conditions. Marx implies that religion has been and remains a powerful force in society because it is a source of heart and spirit. If we think deeply about the implications of his statement, we can learn something very important. It is something that has not been grasped very well, by radical and revolutionary movements, including and perhaps even especially by those movements called Marxist. If one wants to replace traditional religion with something else, the result will be a disaster if that something else does not contain at least as much heart and spirit as what is being replaced. The political philosopher Régis Debray writes the following about the urban Marxist revolutionaries who went to the countryside of Chiapas, Mexico, to radicalize the peasants. He says, "These whites came to convert the Indians to the revolution, as their ancestors did in the old days to the gospel. And voila, it is the Indians who have converted them to another conception of the world, horizontal and modest." Dylan Fitzwater went to Chiapas as a college student and studied the Tzotzil language at the Zapatista Language School. He listened carefully to the indigenous people and wrote a beautiful account of their culture, values, and revolutionary struggle. He found that for the indigenous people, revolution means a movement of spiritual regeneration in which the greatest wealth of the community is found in the flourishing of its collective heart and spirit. These crucial realities are expressed in the indigenous culture of Chiapas through the interconnected concepts of Oan and Chulel. He discovered that the former term means collective heart, while the latter connotes both soul and collective potentiality. The collective heart is fundamental to the community because it is a source of common thoughts and feelings. Fitzwater found that in the indigenous ontology, a person is composed of a body made up of flesh and blood and a group of souls residing within the heart of each individual. This implies that selfhood is a multiplicity, a kind of unity in diversity, rather than the simple substance favored in Western egocentric metaphysics. It derives from the Tzetzal and Tzotzil root chul, which means holy or sacred. And in a strict sense, it denotes a thing's radical other. This concept of the self can be compared to the famous formulation by the great Japanese Zen philosopher Dogen, who said that, quote, "To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be enlightened by all things. To be enlightened by all things is to remove the barriers between oneself and others." One of the most personally, communally, and politically significant indigenous concepts that illustrates how these realities intersect is Ichbal Tamuk. This Tzotzil phrase is defined as to bring one another, that is, the whole community, to largeness or greatness. It implies the coming together of a big collective heart. Fitzwater notes strikingly that the phrase can also be translated simply as democracy. The Zapatista revolution has initiated forms of mutual aid and voluntary cooperation with deep and ancient roots in the traditional commons and the gift economy, which encompass not only human exchange, but exchanges with the whole natural world. These forms of mutualistic interaction contribute as much or even more to what might be called the deep structure of democracy than any formalized political institutions do. Democracy, in a large sense, is much more than a decision-making process, even one as radical as assembly and council government, which have been achieved admirably in the Zapatista communities. It arises as much, or perhaps even more, out of egalitarian, participatory, and cooperative practices that pervade social life. These are not created by any assembly or council, but are at most reaffirmed through such bodies because they have proven their rightness through their contribution over time to the community's mode of flourishing or bringing itself to greatness. The second part is called A Street Named Desire. It's a Hurricane Katrina story. It's one I sometimes have difficult quoting from? I hope I can get through it. Well, perhaps the most decisive turning point in the transformation of my perspective on radical social change occurred in 2005 when I experienced the trauma of Hurricane Katrina, the devastation of much of New Orleans in the flooding, and the corporate capitalist and structurally racist re-engineering of the city in the post-Katrina period. I learned the most important lessons from direct participation in post-Katrina grassroots recovery communities. One might say from living the disaster and living the recovery. I learned to appreciate more deeply the meaning of crisis and collapse. I learned about the role of trauma in personal and group transformation. I learned that a good criterion for assessing groups and organizations is the extent to which at crucial moments they put aside everything that is merely habitual and inessential and respond wholeheartedly to the greatest and most vital needs. I learned that extraordinary disasters can help awaken us to the truth that the decisive moment is always now. I learned above all about the awe-inspiring power of small communities of care. I learned that such communities can help people appreciate more deeply what is of greatest intrinsic value, that which we must recognize as sacred and beyond all price. At the same time, the experience of disaster, mourning, and regeneration gave me an increasing sense of urgency about the need to change the entire present tragic course of world history. I learned to have a much deeper awareness of and concern about the degree of suffering and loss that is taking place at this moment, as well as the vastly greater level that is to come, should we continue the suicidal and ecocidal course of capitalist, statist, patriarchal civilization. An idea that recurs in all the great wisdom traditions is that the confrontation with death, dissolution, and mortality is often a path, perhaps even a necessary path, to spiritual awakening and metaphysical enlightenment. Western mysticism testifies to the existence of a dark night of the soul, in which, says St. John of the Cross, the spirit is purified and stripped of all attachments so that it can unite with the divine. According to the great German mystic Jakob Böhme, when one is lost in the depths of anguish, divine love wells up in its midst and leads one to divinity itself, the groundless abyss of nothingness. Similarly, for Hegel, the great biographer of spirit, we must go through the night of the world in order to develop spiritually. We must face death, whether literally or figuratively, fully experiencing the contingency of all things, including our own fragile existence. He says the life of spirit is not the life that shrinks from death and keeps itself untouched by devastation, but rather the life that endures it and maintains itself in it. It wins its truth only when, in utter dismemberment, it finds itself. Spirit, he says, is this power only by looking the negative in the face and tarrying with it. All this is strikingly reminiscent of Buddhist practice, which also aims at an acute awareness of the emptiness of all things, including one's very self. It teaches that out of an apprehension of emptiness arises a profound appreciation of the world, a deep feeling of compassion, and dedicated, compassionate action. After the hurricane, I returned to New Orleans as soon as possible from work with a summer study program in India. The day I arrived, I heard from my friend Leanie Halbert, who had opened up her home in an unflooded part of the city's 9th Ward as a center for relief activities. A group of volunteers had materialized spontaneously, inspired in part by the work of the grassroots Common Ground Collective. A reporter from the New York daily newspaper Newsday wrote an article about our work at Leanie's. He entitled it "On a Street Named Desire," for our little collective was indeed located on the street famed for its streetcar of bygone days. It was also known as the site of one of the city's largest and most troubled housing developments, which was called the Desire Project. We were undertaking a kind of desire project ourselves. From a certain perspective, the cause of our problems today, the deep underlying social and ecological crises of which the Katrina disaster is a cruel manifestation, is desire. And the solution is also desire. There is a kind of desire that consists of hopeless craving for an impossible object. It rises out of an emptiness of the spirit, a lack that may be imaginary, but has a quite material basis far back in the history of our species and our civilization, and a quite material, tangible effect on us today. It fuels a futile quest to fill up the illusory void. Strange as it seems, we're running on emptiness, that is, on a sense of lack. What's more, we're running out of control, despite all our illusions of power. This emptiness has powered a long history of domination, despair, cynicism, and rage against reality. But there is also another kind of desire, a desire that seeks to heal divisions, break the chains of illusion, and restore a certain contact with long obscured or forgotten realities. Sometimes in the trauma of crisis, it is reawakened. This was our Desire Project. It seemed to me that this project was very much in the spirit of the non-attached compassion that, according to Buddhism, arises out of awareness of a kind of emptiness. In post-Katrina New Orleans, this compassion became widely known as solidarity, not charity, the motto of the Common Ground Collective. In fact, this is almost an exact synonym for non-attached compassion. For what is charity other than compassion distorted by condescension and ego attachment? The Newsday reporter said that for the first time in his life, he had met a group of communitarian anarchists, people who believe in do-it-yourself action within small groups and who wanted to feed the hungry and bring water to the thirsty, to fix the broken homes of the neighbors and to offer a sense of community in their deserted streets. He was willing to concede that whatever Leni and her friends called themselves, and whatever they believed, they were doing a good thing. As Leni herself explained it, I just wanted to bring love back to my neighborhood. Part 3, a rehumanization revolution, restoring the deep commons. We can look at our entire span, the entire span of our human story in terms of 4 geohistorical revolutions and a possible 5th one within the brief human period of geohistory. The first such revolution was the humanization, communalization revolution. Sometimes it's called by anthropologists the human revolution. This revolution gave birth to symbolic forms such as art, religion, and language, and above all to the egalitarian, caring community that nurtured humans and humanization and was seen as part of a larger, more than human Earth community, recognized explicitly in concepts of a wider, more than human system of kinship. It gave birth to the first non-dominating human communities. We will look at in some detail at this revolution in a few minutes. The second revolution, the agricultural statist revolution, instituted the society of domination and hierarchy and increasingly established patriarchal domination in every sphere of existence. The third revolution, the industrial capitalist revolution, continued the development and expansion of domination in every social and spatial direction and superimposed a human-dominated technosphere on the biosphere. In the fourth revolution, the cybernetic megatechnical revolution, technological domination becomes increasingly automatized, internalized, and immunized from any critical, conscious, reflective, value-based steering by human agents. The second, third, and fourth world historical revolutions have progressively expanded the realm of domination within human society over other species and over the Earth. They have produced the sixth great mass extinction of life on Earth and the rapidly accelerating climate catastrophe, in addition to many other hyperentropic and ecocidal effects. The fifth geohistorical revolution, if it occurs, will be a reversal of these devolutionary tendencies. It will be a rehumanization and recommunalization revolution. It will consist in the restoration of a non-dominating, egalitarian, and flourishing community of humanity and nature. It will mean not only survival, which will be a noteworthy achievement in itself, but the regeneration of the deep commons. That is, the earth as a common treasury for all, as the diggers of the 17th century famously called it. We can refer to rehumanizing and recommunalizing only because there was already a humanization and communalization revolution. This first successful revolution was also an anarchic revolution because for it to achieve all its positive goals, the logic of dominance, or arche, which is what that Greek word means, in existing proto-human primate society had to be overcome. This revolution was the first world historical confrontation between domination on the one side and free cooperation and mutual flourishing on the other, and the latter prevailed. Previous primate societies had been societies of hierarchy and dominance, hominid societies. The alpha males were creatures who aimed at monopolizing females while at the same time minimizing their own efforts. The dominant alpha male was the major threat to the emergence of the humanized cooperative community. Consequently, as part of the humanization and communalization process, females developed strategies to defeat alpha male dominance and to promote cooperative behavior that would protect and nurture the community, and especially its most needy members, its offspring. Females had an incentive to attract males who would remain with the family and cooperate in supplying food and care for offspring. Further, these males had an incentive to cooperate with females against alpha male dominance, of which they were also victims. The result was the defeat of this dominance and the establishment of communal childcare, in which human infants were exposed to a variety of human caretakers, including grandmothers who became a key factor in caring for the generations. This collective care fostered the ability to recognize and respond to the nuances of facial expression and more sensitive communication. Humans developed what has been called deep social mind, the capacity for reflexive mind reading, that is, for mutually interpreting mental states through intersubjective interactions. This depended on another crucial development, the evolution of human so-called cooperative eyes that produce greatly expanded capacity for shared attention. On an evolutionary level, the advances in attention and nutrition that came with cooperative childcare permitted the doubling of human brain size. There was thus a dialectical interaction between humanization and communalization and the emergence of complex qualities that further promoted these processes. In all of these ways, collective childcare or alloparenting was central to humanization. It became part of the basis for a larger caring community in which solidarity and love are generalized in communal practices. So this is the revolutionary story of the establishment of the egalitarian cooperative community that was the primordial wellspring of the deep commons. Some might think that it is no more than an optimistic origins myth. However, as speculative as some aspects of this account may be, there is strong anthropological evidence to support many of these claims. We must recognize that we have much work to do within our, we have much to work with in our striving toward a rehumanization and recommunalization revolution. such as the following. We can look to this first revolutionary story. We can look to living indigenous traditions of solidarity and care. We can look to the liberatory dimensions of the great wisdom traditions. And we can look to modern and contemporary liberatory movements that have realized to significant, if varying degrees, the elements of thought and practice that we will need for that revolution. Undertaking such a revolution may seem overwhelming and even unimaginable in any practical, real-world sense. Such a prospect will quite naturally overwhelm anyone who attempts to take on such a challenge individually or with only loose connections to even the best of potential comrades and co-workers. It will be almost unimaginable unless one has a sense that in some significant way, the needed revolution is already beginning to happen here and now, and that we are part of it. Fortunately, it is quite possible to have such a sense. There is experiential evidence that engagements in such a project will be deeply fulfilling and edifying if it is undertaken collectively and communally as the good and necessary work of growing communities of liberation and solidarity, awakening, and care. This is possible if we begin here and now to live the most important part of our lives within growing communities with an ethos of revolutionary, evolutionary love in touch with the deep commons. But how do we start if we find no such existing community in what seems to be the here and now of our lives? A century and a half ago, one of my great heroes, Élisée Reclus, the great revolutionary geographer, had some very good advice on this subject that remains just as good today. According to Reclus, we should gather around ourselves friends who live and act in the same way. It is step by step through small, loving, and intelligent associations that the great communal society will be formed. So we can begin there with the primary affinity group in its deepest and most meaningful sense as a small community of wisdom and love. We can begin regenerating the beloved community there with a few of our closest family, friends, and comrades who share our beliefs, hopes, and aspirations. We can begin practicing revolutionary, evolutionary love there, and then move on to create free, cooperative, base communities, neighborhoods, villages, and towns that share this transfigured ethos. We can create the beloved community at the center of our lives, here and now, and have confidence that it will lead us to effective ways of collectively creating a community of communities that will finally succeed in regenerating the deep commons and the beloved community everywhere. So thank you very much.
Thank you, John. That was very inspiring. Christian, can you spotlight me, or am I not on the right? Thank you very much for that wonderful talk, and particularly I think since you're talking to a church audience, or at least half a church audience, I thought that the invocation of the beloved community at the end was particularly helpful in terms of thinking about what our work is as a religious community and how it ties into sort of the larger project of transformation and building about this, as you call it, a reversal, rehumanization, recommunalization. We have time now for people to ask questions. Christian is ready if people want to raise their hands in the chat function. We can bring you into the webinar, and you can ask your question and have a little dialogue with John.
There should be a little icon down in the middle of your screen at the bottom that will have raise hand, and if you want to ask a question, do that, and I will unmute you.
Oh, and somebody
Gotcha.
wanted to know if I knew Harry Cleaver. I do not know Harry Cleaver. I know who he is, and if you know him, I would love an introduction, but I don't personally know him.
All right, Barbara, I got you. Here you go. Go ahead, Barbara.
I think it's really inspiring, and I see it happening in things like co-housing and our church working toward that kind of community. I want to know, this is inspiring to people who intellectually get it, but what about people, which is probably more than half of the world population, who don't, who aren't fossil with so many of these concepts that we're throwing out? What about them, and how do we bring really uneducated people who are only thinking about survival into this kind of community? Because you don't think about things like we're talking about when you're starving.
Oh, that's a very good question. First, I don't think there's a positive relationship between affluence and awareness of these problems. I actually think that poor people in the models that I use when I point out who's doing the right kind of things are the Kurds in Rojava, the indigenous people in Chiapas. One of my points of reference is the Sarvodaya movement in India, which has largely been defeated, but it was of millions and millions of people, most of them illiterate, which was one of the great inspiring cooperative mutual aid kind of movements in history. And also the Sarvodaya Shramadana movement in Sri Lanka, which has had millions of people involved. And when I give an example of who's doing the right kind of things in North America, my best example is always Cooperation Jackson. Jackson is a very poor city, and I don't believe that poor people have only food on their minds. I think they have love on their minds. They love their children. They love their community. Even in the worst place in the world right now is Gaza. And I look at Al Jazeera every day. I was looking at it for an hour or so every day. I look at France 24, which covers a lot too. I spend a lot of time. Al Jazeera is very good because there's so much on the ground. And what you see among people who are literally suffering from malnutrition and deprivation and the fear of being killed every night, particularly, is that there's so much love. There's so much care. So that's one answer. The other answer is, I've spent a lot of time with Tibetans in exile. I was in India when Katrina hit. I was setting up a summer study program. It was already going. I went to the one that was already going, but I was setting it up for Loyola where I taught. And I've spent a lot of time, for about 15 years, I worked with this summer program every summer with Tibetans. And these were very poor refugees in a very poor country. And they are the most amazing people I've ever met. They have such a wonderful practice of loving kindness, meditation, and tremendous sense of community. I wrote an article on the Sarvodaya movement once. I'm forgetting the name of it. the gift of something. I ended it saying maybe we've had a Peace Corps in the United States where Americans went around the world, bringing peace to people, and there should be. I said there should be something like a Peace Corps where people from a place like Sri Lanka, where people have for 50 years or more have worked in this wonderful cooperative movement. They should go to Europe and North America and teach people how to cooperate and how not to let all their neuroses. One of the things that amazed me about Tibetans is how they accomplish so much without having meetings. Okay, so that's one answer. The other answer is, I've done a lot of work on the 19th century. I did a lot of work on the life and the thought of this geographer, Élisée Reclus, who was spent time in Louisiana. I translated his text on his voyage to Louisiana. He participated in the Paris Commune, the Revolution of 1871. And he wrote a lot about the revolutionary movement at that time. And there were several things that people had at that time that do not exist now. And one was the concept of the international, which was the idea that there was an organization that would incorporate all the working people of the earth into one organization, and that everyone everywhere counted, no matter how poor or how oppressed they were. And this was for decades, a very inspiring ideal for people around the world. And the second thing they had was the idea of the commune. In 1871, the people of Paris rose up and established something called the Paris Commune, which is sometimes thought of as the first popular government in the world, where the people, the common people, took power. Of course, they were crushed, but it became an inspiring ideal. And the idea was everywhere there could be the commune, the democratic, self-determining, cooperative, free commune. And the third idea they had was an idea called the universal republic, which would be that all these communes could eventually come together and become a universal republic of communes. And this was for the whole world. And, they didn't win, but hundreds of millions of people were inspired by these ideas. And history seemed to be going in that direction for a certain number of decades. One thing we don't have is an educational system. I mean, an educational system devoted to creating the beloved community, to liberating humanity, and to liberating the earth. We don't have an educational system that does that. If we had, there were traditions, there's something called the Ateneo in Spanish, it was called the Athénée in French. There were other words in other languages. It was the popular school, which was set up in neighborhoods and villages all over basically the Mediterranean part of Europe and Latin America. And it was a people's school where they studied exactly that. How will we liberate ourselves? It was many people learn how to read, because in Spain, for instance, the government didn't want the peasants to read, just like in places like Texas and Louisiana, the government didn't want slaves to read because it was dangerous for them to read. It was dangerous for Spanish peasants to read. So the Ateneo was where they learned to read, where they learned about art. I don't know if labor history is a great thing to know about. There were the anarcho-syndicalist unions in Spain, which spread all over Latin America before World War I, Cuba, Argentina, Chile, Mexico. And they had one thing they fought for was to have a reader in every factory. And the reader was someone who could read two things, really. They read great works of literature and they read revolutionary propaganda. to the workers as they worked. This was actually, it's expanded to the United States. The cigar workers in Tampa, who were basically Cubans, organized unions which got this right. So just as in Cuba, they had a reader in the cigar factories in Tampa, they had readers. So they got political education and cultural education in the factory as part of their labor demands. Well, we're a long way from that. But the point is, unless we develop something like that, like the Universal Republic, the Commune, the International, unless we find ways of organizing together and tying ourselves together in one common struggle and one common aspiration, we won't succeed.
Great. Jean-Jacques, you were next.
Jean-Jacques Martineau.
That is me indeed, John. Good to see you.
Good to not see you. I see your hand.
Yeah. So following up on this idea that you just addressed, this idea of a collective understanding of culture, I suppose that my comment or question in a way is about how you see potential cultural, mythical projects and relationships within this notion of camaraderie with the so-called more than human, while at the same time addressing the human, yes? But this more than human in the way that we address ecocide and all of our relationships beyond even that, just like affinities, yes? And within the sapiens and the rest of it all, within, I suppose that my question wants to address this notion of mythopoetic narratives and local narratives, and how these narratives can go in tandem with like what I was calling, the more than human. So like extending, these tentaculars that we, address in theory, but also in poetics. And I mean, sort of in the same way that, that the situationists and other poets and other thinkers in the 70s, like the dérivé, bricolage. I'm just curious about how you see these more, I don't know, like I was calling them cultural objectives, but I see them as like popular narratives, like as popular objectives that don't necessarily emerge in general theoretical objectives, but maybe in like more emergent bottom down up rather than pyramid structure. I hope that I'm making sense. The metaphorical structures that may construct meaning outside of current narratives, let me put it this way. So like local narratives and how mythos can potentially operate within this. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The problem is, it's the way you make too much sense. It's very difficult to address all those ideas, but I'll try.
That's my problem.
I've heard of stop making sense. That's famous. Stop making too much sense.
Yeah.
This brings several things to mind. One is not really the idea of the mythopoetic is very important. I had a friend who spent a lifetime dealing with this, and I want to recommend his work. This is only part of the picture, but it's not about the local narrative. It's about the Earth narrative. Thomas Berry used to come to Loyola every summer and do a short course. He devoted his life to developing something called the universe story, which included the Earth story, is our most important part of the universe story. And his thesis was that every culture has a dominant story, an overarching story. And it's the cosmic story. And he thought the cosmic story for our age had to be a retelling of the story of the universe and the Earth. from the Big Bang to the emergence of planets, stars, planets, the emergence of life, all the successive achievements, breakthroughs of life and of mind and of spirit. And I think this is very important. I think to have one thing I didn't mention in my discussion is that I attributed a lot of adjectives to the good community, the beloved community, the deep commons, all of that. But one thing is, at this age, in this age, it has to be a therapeutic community, because we're suffering from the sickness of civilization and the end of civilization, really. Maybe the end of everything for us. But if we're lucky, we can take a world historical turn. The utopian philosophers like Fourier talked about everybody said we went from savagery to barbarism to civilization. He said we have to go one more step. He called it harmony. I'm not sure if harmony is the best word for it, but we have to get beyond the dead end that we're headed toward. So I think a nature-based spirituality, which gives us a cosmic view of things, and our place in the cosmos, is very important to us spiritually and psychologically. Of course, we also have our local narratives, and that's, I really believe in that. I'm very much of a localist. We have to have songs and stories and myths about the place where we live. We have to celebrate it. One thing that Thomas Berry said is the one great characteristic of our species is that we're the only species we know about that can comprehend within our own mind the vastness of the whole universe and celebrate the whole universe. Well, another thing we can do is we are beings that can have an intimate, detailed, rich knowledge of our own place and celebrate it. If we can celebrate both of those, I think we would be very healthy animals. I'm not sure if I answered your question.
So we have a question, John, from the chat, the question and answer chat, saying,
Yes.
from Robert Sullivan, Damarie Sullivan, would it not be practical and effective to create active means of propagating the beloved community by creating public institutions, associations, and so forth, so we can enlarge our circle as we face fascism like our incoming government?
Okay. Merci beaucoup, Robert. Robert is one of the key figures in the revival of the French language in Louisiana. What I said about the international, the commune, and the universal republic was about creating forms of liberation, forms of community that would be local, regional, and global. So yes, we have to organize, but the forms of association that have been passed down to us are not the ones we need. The Commune of Paris was quite different from the municipal government of Paris. So I don't know what to say beyond that. I mean, I think that's what we need. We need organization. We need labor organization. We need communal organization. We need many other forms of organization. So I just have to second your implication of the importance of that.
Okay, David Hensley, you can go ahead.
Okay.
Hey, John. Yes. Yes, it was so good to hear you again. Thanks for this. I just suddenly realized as you were talking that I'm teaching a class on climate change, and this was very useful for me for that. But one thing I encounter a lot with the students is for those who do, I guess, care, quote unquote, a common, thread, it seems to be more and more common, is the kind of misanthropic angle where, the earth is better off without us, for lack of a better
Right.
pithy phrase. And so
That's
you
wrong.
talk about the non-human community and our relationship to it. And, I think, I guess I understand it, but my question is, what would you say to someone who, out of care for the earth,
Right.
kind of has a distaste or a reaction against humanity?
Right. Right. I taught philosophy primarily, but I taught in the environment program at Loyola. And I had wonderful students. And one thing that disturbed me is that some of the best, most aware, enlightened students became very negative about the human species. They were very depressed about what humanity has done to this wonderful, beautiful, rich planet. And I try to counteract that attitude. I think Thomas Berry is a good person to read to counteract that. Humanity has added something very important to this planet. Awareness, consciousness, self-consciousness. Not that there aren't other forms of consciousness, even a certain degree of self-consciousness, but humanity has contributed a lot of diversity. I wouldn't say even contributed. Through humanity, the earth has developed a certain complexity, a certain reflexivity, a certain self-awareness. Élisée Reclus, this great geographer, wrote this 6-volume, 3,500-page work called L'Homme et la Terre, Humanity and the Earth. And at the beginning of this work, he has this statement, L'homme et la nature prennent conscience d'elles-mêmes. You can't exactly translate that. Robert will understand. It's humanity is nature literally taking consciousness of itself. And it's interesting because in French, the word humanity is l'homme, which is masculine, but la nature is feminine. So through humanity, this feminine nature becomes conscious of itself. It's an interesting dialectic in the French. But I think we have to celebrate the fact that we have developed this and we are capable of perfecting it. We can struggle to make humanity what it's capable of being, which is the being that appreciates this planet, that cooperates with other species, and that makes possible this celebration and joy at what nature has achieved on this planet. So that's one answer anyway. Another answer, I suppose, is that it's not human beings that have done all these bad things. It's certain institutions and certain human beings. Ecological people or environmentalists sometimes become very self-righteous, especially sometimes when they're college students. They say everybody should ride a bike or something like that. If you take the example of a single mother with a couple of kids who has 1.5 or 2 jobs, has to get kids to, there are people who have not created the problem, but are caught within this problem, and they can't get out of it as individuals. The only way that they can get out of the problem and not contribute to the catastrophe that we're in the midst of is if we join together and not judge that any individuals are guilty or even that humanity as a whole is guilty, but raise the question, what can we do to liberate ourselves and our species? So I think that's the approach. Another thing, another message that we have, if there are people who are struggling, I've been watching a lot of videos on eco-villages lately. We're doing some projects out on the land at Bayou La Terre. And originally, that was supposed to be a community, which never happened, but we're still trying to promote community there. For people who are in the grips of a terrible economic system, which exploits their labor and does not reward them very much, cooperation is the easiest path to a good and fulfilling life. So I think there are a lot of good answers to this problem of humanity being guilty of things.
So we have a question now from Risa Mandel.
Oh, okay.
They say, bravo, John. What is your opinion of basing emerging human organizations and educations on the watersheds of the 100 or 80 so bioregions of the planet towards forming interwoven regional and planetary networks?
Yeah, I think that's a very good idea. I've been active in bioregional organizing in groups at various times. It has not caught on. I mean, there's one, we have a meditation group and one member on Monday nights, and one member of that group is very enthusiastic about trying to organize a bioregional organization in New Orleans. There have been the Ozark Bioregional Council, I think it's called, has been very active for many years. The problem is we have to do a lot of things at the same time. The question is, how can we do bioregional education? You know, the best way, I think, is to create our own schools on every level and to make that an integral part of education. Secondly, we can work for more local control of schools. You know, Mothers for Liberty, this fanatical quasi-fascist censorship group, is very active in organizing at the local level and influencing schools. You have to work for it. If we, back in the 70s, I was on the board, in fact, of an educational change organization, which was very influential on the school system here in New Orleans for a while, until the culture changed. I've seen a historical case in which good ideas, including ecological and bioregional ideas, were introduced into the schools because there were a lot of people working for that. So people have to stop doing everything online. They have to go to school board meetings. They have to run for school board. They have to create their own schools, which is another thing that people were doing a lot back in the 70s. People had a lot of illusions. They thought these things would automatically happen. There were a lot of free schools being created, open classrooms, Montessori schools, and so forth. I heard people projecting that if things continue this way by the year 2000, you know, most of the schools will be changed. Well, in the 80s, it was all reversed, and standardized testing and rigidity and a lot of other problems came in. And it's only gotten worse since. First, we have to believe that people are creative, they're intelligent, and they're capable of cooperating. And if they put those things together and work, they can create great things, including bioregional great things.
Awesome. Zachary, you're up next.
Yeah, thank you so much. I also I really quick want to say thank you to firstuuhouston of Houston for putting your work on my radar. It's just so incredibly resonant with the things I'm up to. So I'm working on my PhD dissertation at Rice, so not that far from you, on basically a spiritual and mystical praxis of eco-activism. So everything you're talking about is just, I'm thrilled. I'm absolutely thrilled. I'm basically weaving together ecofeminism, deep ecology, and esoteric Tibetan Buddhism, though I was just prepping a lecture on Dogen and ecology. So
Really?
happy to hear you. Yes, yeah. So I'm gonna have to get your email or something and be in touch,
Yeah,
because
that would be great.
everything you're saying is like manna from heaven right now for me. And my question is really has to do with my project, but also with the current political moment, and really is in line with everything everybody's been discussing so far. So my project is really about trying to invoke a kind of non-totalizing, non-hegemonic sense of wholeness or unity, which I think is necessary for a really vital kind of praxis. And I hear this in what you're saying, which again is like medicine for me, about this sort of unifying part. And then I love Thomas Berry's work as well. And but what I'm kind of up against is, and I'll frame this part in terms of the current political moment. This is the question I've been asking: is what I see on the right is, despite the just horrendous underpinnings of neo-fascistic, neo-Confederate kind of entrenched bigotry of all manner, and playing on people's fears and violent proclivities and such, there is a certain galvanized sense of unity that clearly just swept the nation. Whereas what I'm seeing on the left is this kind of proverbial circular firing squad, and I've been seeing it a lot on campus right now, and just the sort of fragmentation that seems to come with the kinds of analytic, discursive self-reflexivity and deconstruction that has become sort of the handmaiden of leftist political discourse. And so my question has really been, how do we inculcate a sense of unitive resonance and togetherness that is something wholly different than what the Trumpists are galvanizing around? Yeah.
Right. First thing we have to do is do it. We have to work. I mean, it's not going to happen on campus, I'm afraid. Some things can happen on campus. I advised campus groups for many years. We had the Loyola Greens. I was the advisor to that. There was an environmental action group. We did good things. We did great things. We were involved in some struggles that I think affected people's whole lives. But we have to confront life. We have to create communities in which people can live together and share their lives and work together on these projects. And one thing, I had a very good conversation with Reverend Colin a couple of weeks ago, in which we talked about fundamentalism and the successes of it. One thing I've been asking people lately, you've already had a hint, but what is the most successful movement in the world in the last 50 years? What movement has grown most over the last 50 years? I have the statistics here. This is one thing I cut from my talk. Does anybody know? I think I wanted to find the exact number.
My guess would be Christian fundamentalism.
Well, it isn't just fundamentalism. That's a pretty good answer, but it's charismatic Christianity or Pentecostalism. I just wanted to find this exact. I have it in my notes on the sermon. Yeah. Okay. From 1970 to 2021, about 50 years, the number of people globally identifying as Pentecostal or charismatic Christians grew from 58 million to 656 million. That is an astounding growth of any movement in 50 years. One thing that occurs to me in response to this is that we have to do at least as well as they did, because we don't have 50 years left to create a movement that will reverse the course of global world history. But we have to do that. Why have they had this success? I think we have to ask, what needs are they fulfilling? We have to understand the psychological and spiritual state of humanity at this time. Another thing that's happened is a lot of countries have gone from secular Islam to Islamic fundamentalism. That might be the second. Indonesia, for instance, is the largest Muslim country in the world, and it's become much more fundamentalist. I spent a little time in Bangladesh, and my friends there told me they were very, very secular Muslims until 20 years ago or so, and now Islamic fundamentalism is a major force in that country. So what is it about this time in history? What are the stresses? What are the fears that people are responding to? What's going on psychologically? What's going on, just in the last 20 years, in which people have spent so much time looking at screens, looking at phones, listening to audio and video, watching video, listening to audio. What has happened to the psyche, to the mind in this period of time, and how can we respond to this? I mean, obviously, the technological revolution has been even greater than the growth of Pentecostal and charismatic Christianity. Young people growing up in the last 10 years are living in a quite different social and psychological world from all the people who have ever existed before, although there have been revolutions. The printed word was a revolution. Radio was a revolution. Television was a revolution. But this is a much deeper revolution that we have to come to grips with. So the question of what can we do is not an easy one, but the beginning is, let's look at the problem. Figure out how we can respond to that problem. What do people need? I mean, in Hurricane Katrina, we knew what people needed. They needed to save their homes. They needed to make sure their homes were not torn down. They needed the mold to be cleared. They needed food. They needed trees cut down. They needed to be taken to the hospital. We knew exactly what people needed. And by the way, it was the most wonderful, it was a terrible period in my life in which a number of members of my family lost everything in the flooding. People were exiled from the city, but it was in many ways the happiest period in my life because I lived with a community of people who at that moment were spending 24 hours a day, really, even in their dreams and resting. They were focused on doing exactly what the community needed. And I found that to be the most fulfilling thing that I had ever experienced. So if we do it, we will find a lot of gratification, and others will see that and become part of it.
We've got a question from Danielle, who asks, or it's really, I guess it's more of a comment, but I'm going to read it and you can respond anyways. Open education resources exist in promotion of zero-cost textbooks. You can find bioregional resources or make them for colleges.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. So I think we probably have time for one more question, and then I'd like to ask a question. So I don't know if anybody who is in the participants would like to try to put their hand up.
I really could I say one thing in response to that last question? I had a lot of quotes from spiritual traditions that I wanted to incorporate. Let me just quote one from, two short sentences or so from the Buddhist tradition. I have things from Taoism and Christianity that I think are very helpful. But there are two key points about what we can do. Zhou Zhu, the great Chinese Chan master, was once asked, "Where is the practice hall?" He replied, "Everything everywhere is the practice hall. There is no other place." That's the first thing. So there's plenty for us to do, and it works. The second quote is this one. Venerable Ananda went up to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and said to him, "Sir, good friends, companions, and let me rephrase that. Sir, to the Buddha, good friends, companions, and associates are half the spiritual life." The Buddha replied, "Not so, Ananda. Good friends, companions, and associates are the whole of the spiritual life." I think that's those two things. Everywhere is practice. Good friends are the whole of the spiritual life. So we have to find people who are receptive to the kind of transformation or transfiguration that's necessary and change our lives together. And other people will see it, and it will be viral, to use a good virus.
So we've got
Renate.
Renata.
and then Nancy, and if we can try to get through these in like 6 minutes, so I can.
I'm wondering if Danielle was Danyell.
Yes.
I hope to see her in New Orleans soon, and I appreciate her comment. Renata is coming to us sort of from Germany, but she's in New Orleans now.
Yeah, no, I'm in New Orleans right now.
Representing Germany.
Yeah, because I wanted to say that I am in a community right now where we are building something like you described, John. And it just feels wonderful. It's hard work. It requires really good cooperation among people. But it's just wonderful. I have no problem spending a lot of time and energy there. One thing that is one requirement or something that was really needed to build this was land that the city of Cologne gave us for leased to us, like, so we could develop a property that was there and renovate it. And so it also does take support from public institutions to build a community like that. Otherwise it takes so many resources. So I mean it takes that side too. But no, I can just say that it's an absolutely wonderful experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'd recommend is there's several on YouTube. There's several channels about eco villages and similar experiments, and it's very inspiring to see what people are doing. I mean, there's some famous ones, like the biggest one is Findhorn in Scotland, but there are others, and they've gotten land by various means. I saw a video on one community where a woman had a couple of 100 acres of land. She was getting divorced. The land had to be sold for dividing up things. So she ended up selling it under market value to a cooperative group, which established an eco village, and it's doing very well. I mean, I have 88 acres. I'd like to do something with. The original idea was, I've spent originally I bought the first 32 acres for $230 an acre. I was very poor at the time. I got the next 40 acres for $500 an acre. I was moderately poor at that time. And then I bought a few more when I was making more money. But I ended up with 88 acres. Originally, I wanted to form a land trust community, and with one half-hearted attempt that didn't work, I ended up giving up because there was just not interest at the time. But it's always worth the effort. And right now, what I'm hoping will happen on this land, which is called, well, the La Terre Institute, but also Bayou La Terre Woodland Center is actually what the land is called. I'm hoping that we can use this land for people coming together and studying, discussing, planning, and inspiring the creation of communities and also other forms of cooperation that would support communities. So if anybody's interested in doing those things, in December, we're having a weekend workshop in mid-December based on the book Practice of the Wild by Gary Snyder. It's the fourth time actually that we're having a weekend group to study a few sections of that work. And I'm hoping that something will come out of it, that many communities will ultimately be established. So if anybody would like to work on it, please get in touch.
All right, Nancy, I'll have you next.
And this will be the last question, and then I've got a closing question for John that I'd like to hear from him reflect on, because we're running close to time.
Go ahead, Nancy, you can talk.
Nancy, you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, that's the problem. I didn't hear anything. Yes, unmute is possible.
There you go.
What you're saying sounds a lot like A Paradise Built in Hell by Rebecca Solnit. I was wondering if you were aware of that and if you think they're similar.
Well, it's a wonderful book. She's come to New Orleans a number of times. She also co-authored a book on New Orleans, but it wasn't long after Katrina that she came and did a wonderful talk. Paradise Built in Hell. Yeah, it's an amazing book. It discusses many of the themes I was talking about disaster. She started with studying the San Francisco earthquake, and then she went on. She has a wonderful chapter on Hurricane Katrina in that book. All her work is wonderful.
So, John, I think we're coming to the end of our time, and you're in front of a sort of a Unitarian Universalist church, or an audience that's half a Unitarian Universalist church, and you have some experience or some connection to Unitarian Universalism. So I would love for you to reflect for a few minutes on sort of what you would tell specifically a Unitarian Universalist church community that we should be doing or talking about in light of all that you've said. Sort of what is your advice, for us, not in the sort of abstract, but because I know you and your family were connected to the New Orleans church for a while. So what is not your advice in the abstract, but particularly for a Unitarian Universalist community?
Well, my life for, I guess, 30 years was very much connected to the Unitarian Church because I attended meetings probably a couple of times a month at the church. My former wife grew up as a Unitarian, and I've been exposed to a lot of Unitarianism in various ways. I would say one thing it would be my advice to any church, really, to reach out, to be a church of the people. To join in the struggles and the joys of people, to to be a place of refuge to people who need a place of refuge. I think the other thing I would say is if it would be possible to use the church as a means of creating small communities that would go beyond the church. You know, the model of base communities is very good. At Loyola, where I taught, we had two people who did extensive research on base communities. And I've done a lot of reading on Latin American based communities. There were 100,000 of them in Brazil at one time. They were indispensable in spreading the message of liberation theology. And they were a very revolutionary and radicalizing force across Latin America. So I would say if the church could be a way of creating small communities in which people develop, usually classically the base communities were between 20 and 70 people, and they met weekly usually. Their common frame of reference was religious. It was the People's Church, which was very much in the tradition of the Hebrew prophets and the Gospels, the Gospel of love and the Hebrew prophet's message of justice. And they tried to live this in their everyday lives. So I think if and by the way, this is one thing that the other side is doing. In these mega churches, they often have small groups in which people develop close ties, because people cannot live on the level of the spectacle, to use the situationist word. People have to live their lives in relationship to others. And I would say one thing that's very important, well, also that families be part of the church, extended families, that it become a tradition for people. I think a church, any social movement really, has to be a place where people can go for all the passages of life, the important moments in life, the birth of a child, the death of a family member, the initiation of a young person into adulthood, forming partnerships. All of these things are so important, and if as much of that as possible can be tied to a spiritual vision that includes all of humanity and the earth, and also the local place and its own identity and mythology and symbols, you will have achieved a lot.
Well, thank you, John, for that wonderful bit of wisdom and for a wonderful bit of conversation.
Thank you.
It's been great. And for those of you who have joined us online and are not part of our congregation, we certainly encourage you to check us out, perhaps as a way to think about being part of a project of creating circles of communities. And we do worship online as well as in person. This talk has been recorded, and at some point, probably next week, because the office closes on Thursday, it will be posted online on our website and on YouTube for those folks who would like to find it and disseminate it to others. So thank you very, very much. And we hope to see you all again. And John, we hope that we'll have the opportunity for further conversation with you, because it's been really inspiring and thoughtful.
Thank you. I do too. Thank you so much.